The night air in Rome was heavy with perfume and secrets. A black limousine slid through cobblestone streets, its tinted windows hiding the man inside. He was known by many names, but whispered most often as Il Casanova. A mafia boss whose empire stretched across continents, built not only on smuggling and laundering but on seduction itself. He stepped out of the car with the elegance of a monarch. His suit was tailored in Milan, his watch gleamed with diamonds mined from Africa, and his smile carried the weight of promises never kept. To the world, he was a businessman. To the women he called wives, he was a husband. In Rome, Isabella believed she was his only queen. In Lagos, Amara thought the same. In Dubai, Layla wore his ring. Each woman was a partner in crime, a pawn in his empire of dirty money. He whispered love, but collected loyalty. He offered affection, but harvested wealth. He was a man of no fixed abode. His home was wherever profit flowed. When Dubai's oil money surged, he lived with Layla. When Lagos's smuggling routes paid more, he stayed with Amara. When Rome's laundering channels grew fat, Isabella became his companion. Each woman thought she was chosen. Each believed she was the center of his world. But the truth was darker. They were satellites orbiting his greed, feeding his empire with devotion and resources. And yet, beneath the silken sheets and whispered vows, cracks began to form. One of the wives noticed the pattern. She saw how he drained them, leaving debts and children behind. She began to wonder. What if the wives united? What if the empire built on their backs could be turned against him? The Cassanova Mafia smiled in the mirror, unaware that the seeds of vengeance had already been planted. The whisper of betrayal. Lagos was loud with life, the kind that never slept. Markets buzzed, horns blared, and the air smelled of spice and ambition. In a penthouse overlooking the city, Amara sat alone, staring at the ring he had given her. Gold, heavy, engraved with a name that wasn't hers. He had just left for Dubai. Said the oil deals were heating up. Said he'd be back soon. Said he loved her. She didn't believe him anymore. Amara had started noticing patterns. The sudden withdrawals from their joint account. The calls he took in languages she didn't understand. The way he always left when things got profitable. She had once thought she was his queen. Now she wondered how many queens he had. She began to dig. Quietly, carefully, she found photos, him with another woman in Rome, another in Dubai. She found documents, properties and names she didn't recognize, accounts she hadn't signed for. And then she found the truth. She was one of many. Her heartbreak turned to fury. But fury without direction is just noise. So Amara wrote a letter. Not to him, to the others. She didn't know their names, only fragments. But she knew enough to start a whisper. The letter traveled through hands that didn't ask questions. It reached Isabella in Rome. It reached Layla in Dubai. It reached others whose names Amara would learn later. And with each delivery, the whisper grew louder. They began to talk. Carefully, secretly, they shared stories, bank statements, bruises. They mapped his empire not with admiration, but with vengeance. Amara became the pulse of the rebellion. She wasn't the loudest, but she was the first. And in betrayal, she found clarity. The Cassanova Mafia had built his empire on charm and control. But now, his wives were learning to speak. And when women speak, empires tremble. The alliance. They met in silence. Not in boardrooms or cafes, but in encrypted chats, whispered calls, and coded letters tucked into handbags. The wives of the Cassanova Mafia, once strangers, now sisters, began to build something stronger than love, a network. Isabella in Rome had access to his laundering routes. Layla in Dubai knew the oil accounts. Amara in Lagos had the passwords to his shell companies. Each woman had been used. Each now had a weapon. They didn't scream. They didn't threaten. They planned. Isabella created a ledger, a map of his empire drawn in ink and fury. Layla traced his offshore accounts, linking them to properties in Monaco, Singapore, and Cape Town. Amara coordinated the flow of information, turning heartbreak into logistics. They called themselves the Circle. Not for revenge, but for reclamation. They weren't just taking back what was stolen. They were building something new. The Cassanova Mafia still smiled in photographs, still whispered promises into new ears. But behind him, the ground was shifting. His empire was being dissected by the very women who had once built it. And when he returned to Lagos, expecting loyalty, he found silence. Not the silence of submission, the silence of strategy. The first strike. It began with a wire transfer. Layla rerouted $2 million from a Dubai account into a fund labeled Children's Futures. The name was a lie, but the money was real. Isabella leaked documents to a journalist in Rome, exposing shell companies tied to arms deals. Amara bribed a customs officer in Lagos to seize a shipment labeled medical supplies. Inside were diamonds. The Cassanova Mafia felt the tremor. Not a quake, not yet. But something was shifting. He called Layla. She didn't answer. He flew to Rome. Isabella met him with a kiss and a forged smile. She handed him a glass of wine and watched him drink, knowing the poison wasn't in the glass. It was in the files she had already sent. The circle moved like ghosts. They didn't confront. They dismantled. One account frozen. One shipment seized. One ally turned. And always, they left no trace. He began to panic. The empire he had built on seduction and silence was unraveling. He hired investigators. He questioned his men. He even suspected his wives, but not all of them. Never all of them. That was his mistake, because while he searched for betrayal, it was already complete. The fall. The Cassanova Mafia stood in his Monaco penthouse, staring at a screen full of red alerts. Frozen accounts. Seized shipments. Leaked files. His empire, once untouchable, was bleeding from every corner. He called Isabella. No answer. He messaged Layla. Silence. He tried Amara. Her number was disconnected. He was alone. The circle had moved faster than he imagined. They had turned his own empire against him, not with bullets, but with brilliance. Each woman had played her part. Each had struck with precision. Interpol arrived before dawn. He was arrested not in a blaze of glory, but in a silk robe, barefoot, holding a glass of wine. The headlines called him the Casanova Kingpin. The world called him finished. But the women didn't stop there. They took what was theirs, the properties, the accounts, the legacy. They built schools, clinics, shelters. They turned blood money into futures. They didn't just dismantle his empire. They rewrote it. And when asked how they did it, Amara simply said, "We stopped believing his love. And started believing our own power."